coming up on this episode of the New Money Habits podcast.
We list some, different potential careers on one side of the paper, and some vocation stuff at the top, but also, money and God's will, giving glory to God, and my values. Do those things mix up? And then they have to make some really tough decisions.
Hey there, budgeteers. Are you ready to unlock the power of each payday and take control of your finances like a boss? Introducing the Payday Power Planner from New Money Habits. This isn't your average budgeting tool. Oh no. With the Payday Power Planner, you'll harness the unique rhythm of your paychecks to supercharge your financial game. Say goodbye to the confusion of monthly budgets and hello to the clarity of every payday. You'll know exactly when money is coming in and when it's going out, giving you the edge you need to stay on top of your finances. But that's not all. With the Payday Power Planner, you'll easily spot whether you're rocking a surplus or facing a deficit. Armed with this knowledge, you'll make informed decisions that set you up for financial success. It's time to transform your relationship with money and create the new money habits you need to achieve financial freedom. Get your hands on the Payday Power Planner from New Money Habits today and start making every dollar count. Don't let financial stress hold you back. Create a better plan for your money and seize the power of your pay period and thrive with the Payday Power Planner. Visit newmoneyhabits.com now to grab your free copy and unleash your financial potential. Well, welcome back, Maria. Always happy to have you with us.
Happy to be here.
So why don't you give us just a little bit of an update? Like, what do you got going on? What are you working on? What's new and exciting?
Well, one of the things I'm working on right now is a personal finance class for middle schoolers. You want to know how I started doing that, Nino?
Yes, I do.
All right.
How did you start doing that?
I really believe that there are times when we have an idea of what we're going to do, and then God just laughs at that plan. It's like, yeah, no, you're not going to do that right now. So I try to look for opportunities in the different circumstances that I am in. And that's how this ended up coming to be. So maybe your listeners know, maybe they don't, but I have 4 children that range from the ages of 20 down to 5. And the 2 younger ones of those 2, I actually homeschool. That has brought different opportunities to me, never financially related, just for the record. It's always been, just kind of meeting different people, being in different communities, co-ops, that kind of thing. And last year I had the opportunity to teach, but it was grammar. So again, nothing at all related to money, but I was taught a different way to teach, if you will. So it's a very classical approach. It's a lot of attending, which means looking at and seeing different things and trying to find things. And so it's a lot less didactic, if you will.
Okay.
I learned that approach and really started to realize how much like coaching that kind of was, where you're asking questions and having people find the answers for themselves. And so naturally, it came naturally to me and it was intriguing. And so this year there was an opportunity to kind of bring personal finance to this world of middle schoolers. And I said, well, I'd be happy to do that with one caveat. And she said, what's that? And I said, I want to create my own curriculum. I want to make sure that I can do it in a way, it's delivered in a way that is more classically based. It's more attending to rather than just didactic. I said, I'd like to make it God-centered. And I would like to be able to bring in a splash of psychology with that, just understanding why we do what we do and how creating habits very early on can keep that going later on in life. And she said, done, you can do that. And so I decided, what the heck, I might as well give it a shot. And so I took on this job, not having any curriculum created whatsoever. And so week by week, I keep showing up and I keep creating the next week's worth of content. And I think we're about 8 weeks in now. And I've started to share that with others around in that co-op area and already have a class started in November coming up. So with people who are outside of there. So that's what I've been working on.
Fantastic. If I can pry just a little bit or poke at it, like I'm
sure.
just curious, like middle schoolers, like what is the focus? Like what are some of the key tenets that they're exploring when it comes to personal finance at that age?
Yeah, well, some of it, I'm sure you're shocked to hear this, but we're actually started with values, things that
Oh,
are important to them, things that get them excited, so that we can figure out how to actually get some of those numbers working. But also, one of the things I'm really focused on is being able to find information and be able to identify things so that when they are getting older and they're exposed to a lot of the stuff in the world that they now call adulting, which just cracks me up that that's a verb. But when they are exposed to some of that stuff, they don't have to know everything, but they'll know how to look for the important tenets of it. So, for example, EOBs and pay stubs and things that a lot of adults that we work with, they look at a pay stub and they basically know, how much am I getting paid? They look at the direct deposit amount and that's all they know. They don't really know what's being taken out for taxes. Maybe they've never heard of FICA. Maybe they don't really realize that they have access to an HSA, for example, or maybe they are putting money to an FSA, but they don't know that they're doing that because they just signed up for this thing at open enrollment, and then they have $100 coming out of their check every time, but they don't know where it's going, and that by the end of the year they never used it, so it goes away. So those kinds of things, just being able to be more aware of what is in front of them so that they can make better decisions moving forward. So that's kind of what we focused on so far. And then in the last half, we're going to actually be looking more at things like how to use this money separated into different accounts for themselves, understanding the difference between, checking account versus savings account versus high yield savings account, so that they could just make better informed decisions.
Awesome. I love it. It kind of ties into what we want to talk about today, which is kind of how to deal as parents with the next generation, kind of training them up in the way that they want them to go so that they will never depart from it. But I know I've had this conversation before, but I think I've also done it on a solo cast, so I didn't have somebody to kind of banter with and challenge some of my my ideas. But the idea at large is, I'm noticing in an ever-growing, more difficult economy to live in, that more and more young adults kind of almost have to choose to stay at home longer, but then we're coming out of a generation that we have given them a very hard time about, like, you live at home for far too long, and you and I grew up in a day and an age where 18, you're out the door, never to return. So it's 2024. Where do we land on all of this, preparing the next generation for when is it the right time to exit the home, and how do we get them prepared? And I thought, that's kind of a lot. There's a lot to kind of unpack there, but I thought it'd be a worthwhile conversation to say, hey, in the tough economy in 2024, with everything that's kind of going on, how do we even think about getting the next generation prepared? Hey there, budgeteers. Good news can only be good news if there's bad news. So, what's the bad news? The bad news is you and I have a deadly disease called sin, and this disease causes us to rebel and disobey God. See, God is holy, righteous, and just, and He cannot be in the presence of sin. So this horrible disease of ours separates us from the God who created us. And the bad news gets worse. There isn't anything you or I can do to make ourselves right with God. We are dead in our sins and on our way to an eternity separated from God. But that's not God's will for us. See, for God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whoever believes in Him should not perish but have everlasting life. God did what only God could do. He made a way for us to be reconciled to Him through Jesus Christ. Jesus came into the world to save sinners like you and me. While we were still sinners, storing up God's anger against us for our rebellion and disobedience, Christ died for us. Jesus took the punishment that you and I deserve and have earned. Jesus is the substitute for your punishment and mine. Now, isn't that some good news? The word gospel means good news. The gospel of Jesus Christ is that you and I broke God's law and Jesus paid the fine. When we place our faith and trust in Jesus, we get to experience God's grace and mercy. Our gratitude should turn us from our rebellious and disobedient sin toward God, seeking after Him and His righteousness. When we do, God gives us a new heart and a new mind. Praise God for His goodness, and remember, God loves, humans sin, Jesus saves.
Yeah, it is a loaded question. I'm going to first say that the part of the question that's really difficult is the idea that it's 2024, and I think you said, when is the right time? I think that's a tough question to answer because everything else that you mentioned around that, Nino, is circumstantial.
Okay.
So it's 2024. The economy is a certain way. The generation has these certain mindsets, whatever. And if we answer the question today, let's just say we have a really great discussion and we land on 25. 25 is the time to, leave the nest. It's probably going to change. Maybe even before it gets released. I'm probably not that soon. But you know where I'm going with that. If
well
circumstances change, then so will that. So I like the first part of your question much better, which is how do we train our kids to know when that time is? Because I think that that's something that probably won't change. It's going to it might, like, their conclusion might change based on some of the circumstances around it, but their readiness won't necessarily change. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's focus on some of that stuff. And I think that's why, just going back to what we opened up with, that's why I want these kids to understand what to look for, how to determine. So one of the things, you didn't ask this question, but I'm going to give it to you anyway. One of the things that we just talked about last week was careers. But because this is more of a God-centered approach that I use with these kids, I don't just talk about careers. I talk about vocation as well. And so, our vocation is that which God is calling us to do or to be. And some of these kids who I'm talking to are going to be called to be a parent. Some of them will be called to be a spouse. Some of them will be called to maybe even live the single life and have a career as a firefighter, right? So these are not things that are exclusively mutually exclusive, but they are things that might be happening together. I want them to be able to know, yes, let's definitely look at what is the money that's coming in. Is it something that can serve whatever that purpose is? So we are looking at that, but so many people stop there. They stop with, is this something that's going to cost you a lot to go to college and then pay you a lot when you're out? And does that make it worth it for you? But what we did was we kind of lined those things up with, okay, is it something that is in God's will for your life? Now, do these kids know that right now? No, of course not. But I want them to start thinking about discerning that as they move forward. Is that job going to glorify God once you've done it? So that's another piece that we want to look at. And is it going to allow you to do your vocation as well? So for example, if you my daughter right now, she's dating this young gentleman and he is a very, very sweet kid. I probably would be fine if she said one day, this is the man that I've chosen to marry. And because I would probably be fine with that, I also have no problem asking questions of a potential future mother-in-law. For example, what is it you'd like to do? Now, he wants to go and be a surgeon, right? And he's got these high ideas of what that's going to look like. It's like a specialized surgeon, but I don't even think he wants to do it for himself. I think he feels obligated to do it for his family. Okay. His family of origin, not his future nuclear family. And so what I'm trying to do is help him to see what, if it's important to him to have a wife and children. If it's not important to him to have a wife and children, then we don't need to be having this discussion because you won't be with my daughter, right? But if it's important for him to have a wife and children, is something where you're going to be gone 18 hours a day or have to be on call 24 hours a day going to serve that vocation as well? And if the answer is no, then maybe that's not actually the career you're being called to, because that it's a really great career, but maybe that's for somebody who wants to stay single for their whole lives. See where I'm going with some of that?
Yes.
So getting the kids to be able to identify those things. Now, again, they're like 14. They don't know all of this stuff yet, but I want them to start thinking about some of that.
Yep. So I want to hit the brakes for just a second. And as somebody who myself, I've used that term vocation interchangeably with career, but it sounds like
Mhm.
you're using it differently. I just wanted to ask you to clarify real quick. What's the difference between a vocation and a career?
Well, from a religious standpoint, and that's the lens that I'm looking through, it really is the idea of whether you're called to married life, single life, or religious life. And um,
Oh,
and then there's a career on top of that. So what I talk about vocation. It's kind of more like the role that you play in God's design, if you will. And the career is the thing that you do to earn money so that you can actually take care of some of those other areas of your life.
okay. So, like for myself, I know that God obviously had called me to be a husband and a father because I am those things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and I know that the spiritual gifts, plural, that He has given me, one is teacher. And so being able to do that, and I've been in that kind of capacity for the last 20 years in one way or another. Of course, you can use that gift even within your own home, leading your
Mm-hmm.
family well, that
Correct.
sort of thing. Um, but then also, I'm seeing it for the first time based off of your explanation, and I appreciate it, is the idea of how do I take those things and serve my family well? Because there have been opportunities to work 16 to 18-hour days and never be around to support my wife and my children. But God has gotten my attention and said, no, 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 hold on. Like, is that going to serve your family the best or this other thing? And then the blessing of flexibility in schedule comes along, and then I can take that same vocation of teacher
Mm-hmm.
and the role that I play in life
Mm-hmm.
and use it to be the coach to my son's flag football team and bring that leadership to that area of life as well. So thank you for the clarification because it helped me. I hope it helped our listeners.
Yeah, you're very welcome. And before you hit the brakes, the last thing I was going to say was that we bring values into that. So does that align with the values that we talked about in the first week that we even got together? And so
Mhm.
those are the things that we kind of line up. We list some, different potential careers on one side of the paper, and some vocation stuff at the top, but also, money and God's will, giving glory to God, and my values. Do those things mix up? And then they have to make some really tough decisions. And I know that it seems like it's not related to what you were talking about, but it absolutely is, because I think when we're deciding when is a good time for our children to quote unquote leave the nest, all of those things have to be considered. We definitely need to consider the financial side of things. And I think that when you say we're in 2024, I mean, let's get real. It's at the time of this recording, super, super expensive to rent.
Yep.
So I've got a 20-year-old. I mentioned that at the top of the show. And she happens to be in college. She's living on campus. And so technically that's rent, because she's actually paying to live on campus. She's
Hmm.
paying to eat there. And she actually is paying half of any of that tuition. So she's needing to see how that works. But when she graduates, if she's not going to get married right away, I am okay with her not leaving this house, because if she's got future goals and she's throwing $2,000 away a month and not making enough to make that happen. I mean, because again, let's be real, even with a college degree, the amount of income is not quadrupled since I started working. And when I was working, I could get rent for like $500 a month.
Right.
And so when we're looking at apples to apples, it's just not the same. And so I certainly don't want her to, completely bankrupt herself just trying to live somewhere, just because I had an idea when I was younger that you need to get your kids out of the house at 18. Having said that, I also don't want her to be a freeloader. So that's one of my values. I don't want my child to turn into a freeloader. And so I will not allow her to stay here absolutely for free because that doesn't align with the value that I have.
Right. I'm actually calculating numbers real quick because I'm such a math nerd like that.
Yeah, that's good.
But think about this. So you said you could get rent for $500. And I remember like my first apartment was $300 a month. My second was $400 a month. So very real.
Okay.
Well, in order for that let's call it $500. In order for that $500 to be just the equivalent of 1 week's pay or 25%. So my dad, when he was getting me ready for moving out, he's all like, "Hey son, make in 1 week what your rent or mortgage is for the month." Okay. So you're talking about an income of $2,000 a month. You can afford the $500.
Right.
But if we kept that same percentage, right? If it's make in 1 week what your rent or mortgage is for the month, and your rent or mortgage is $2,000, then you better be making $8,000 a month,
Yep.
which is what, $96,000 a year? And what college graduate is starting at $96,000 a year?
Right.
So to
Right.
your point, yeah, the economy today is just so out of whack that you can't, from a financial perspective, do it in a way that, and this is all new since 2020, by the way, right? So I've run the numbers, and even back in like 2016, 2018, 2019, that ratio was still pretty similar. It has erupted, exploded since 2020. And you can't afford financially to do that. But we don't just look at things just from a financial perspective.
Right.
So and as you said, so now you switch it to, okay, you're not going to leave the house because financially you're not prepared for that. And we can talk about some other reasons why you might not be prepared. But you also said, okay, she can stay at home, but she's not going to stay at home for free. So what say you when we look at some of these numbers? Like, would you charge her $500 a month, or is there another way you'd approach that?
That's a great question. I'm looking forward to finding that out in about a year. No, but I think one of the things I would probably do is figure out, I'd want to make sure she has a job, something. I'd try to figure out how many student loans she has as well to see, what is she still having to pay back. I think that a minimum of $500 would probably be good because I want it to be substantial enough where she gets used to having to do a chunk of money to somebody just for being able to live there. I also recognize, however, that she'd be renting a room, not a full-on house, not a full-on apartment, right? And so I probably wouldn't keep the full $500. I want to charge her the full $500 because, again, it gives her that practice giving somebody that money on the first of the month, just creating that habit.
Yeah.
But I probably would hang on to it so that she can do something with it later on. I would probably keep some of it because it does cost money to have your child live with you. That's just the reality of it. And I paid for half of her college tuition, so I can pay some of myself back for some of that, Yeah. But I think I probably would, without her knowing, stash away some of that so that when she's ready to, whether it's get a house or get married, she can either use that as a down payment or she can use that as, part of her wedding gift, stuff like that. So, but I don't want her to know that I would be doing that.
Yeah.
That's important.
Yeah, this is an area in which my views and from excuse me, from my own personal experience and then from experiences that others have shared with me has changed radically. I graduated high school in 1997. My dad was one of those guys. He was born in 1935. He was a little older when he had me. But he's one of those guys that's like, okay, well, you're a man. So when you leave, you're gone. You're not coming back. Now, truth be told, my father walked back on that. But that's another story for another day. But I was raised in this: you turn 18, you're a man, and if you decide to leave this house, then that's it. Like, you're out in the world. Okay, fine. And I held to that belief for a very long time because I did that. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
yes, at 18 I left the house. By 20 he took me back in. But I still held to that belief, like, okay, like, you get your teenager or somebody in their young 20s, you get them ready for this. Then I started financial coaching back in 2013, and some of my my first and longest lasting clients are of like the Latino Hispanic culture. And for them to share with me, like, that the fact that they had adult children living at home and that it was completely their intent to keep those adult children at home until they are married. And then we start to talk about, okay, well, what about financially, and how are you training them up financially, and what financial literacy do they have? Because a lot of times they weren't charging any type of
Mm-hmm.
room and board. But then as this experience grew and grew and grew, what I've come to realize is, one, what a great way to approach just having children. You do not leave this house until you are ready to be married, for a number of different reasons. One is financial. Why put your offspring at behind the eight ball financially by sending them out into a world to start spending that kind of money too soon? Unless that $2,000 a month that they were paying is for mortgage instead of rent, because then at least it's being contributed to an asset that's growing in value, hopefully.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But other than that, there's cultural reasons to keep them home, from a maturity thing, and just a preparedness and a successful transition to their own nuclear family, right? To go from their family of origin to a nuclear family, and not have all that craziness in between that is just world. And I could go way down a tangent, which I will restrain from doing, and just focus on, it's a great way to prepare. But as I worked with more and more families like that, and we discussed, should you charge them room and board or rent or whatever, and what should you do, it came down to this: adult children, so 19 to early to mid 20s, they need a sense of responsibility and dignity. And so having conversations with those parents about, don't undermine your adult child's dignity by not charging them anything.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you want to do the very generous gift giving thing of, we will just sock that money away and return it to the child as a gift, a wedding gift, a down payment on a house, whatever, later, that's a beautiful gift. And by all means do that. But in the meantime, don't undermine their dignity by not charging them. Make them contribute to something that's bigger than themselves.
Mm-hmm. And I think to that point, it's exactly why, by the way, beautifully said. I really like how you said that. To that point, though, it's why I wouldn't tell my child that I'm doing that, because
That's
then
right.
not only do they think, oh, I've got some of that money I got coming back to me later on, but it also would undermine their dignity, because it would say to them, without saying it to them, I'm saving your money on your behalf because I don't trust you to do that yourself.
And thank you for saying that. You're absolutely right. If you're going to do that generous gift, I would hold it back from them, because you're absolutely right. And because if they were out in the world paying rent or a mortgage, they should be saving their own money anyway.
Mm-hmm.
They might fall back. It's almost like when I have a buddy who served 20 years in state law enforcement, right? And he knew, oh, I get a pension. So for the last 20 years, he hasn't saved a dime towards his own retirement. And I get it, you have a pension, and that's great. But how much more ahead of the game would you be if you had also taken that time to save for your own retirement? And so it's the same thing, right? When you know you have like this forced savings account,
Mm-hmm.
somebody else is doing it for you, you're
Mm-hmm.
less likely to do it for yourself. And so that's another reason not to tell them, is so that they build up their own habit of saving. Hey there, budgeteers. Are you tired of feeling like your finances are running the show? Well, it's time to flip the script and take charge of your money with New Money Habits Financial Coaching. This isn't your typical financial advice. New Money Habits is about empowering you with the knowledge and tools you need to make savvy money moves and build a solid financial foundation. Here's the deal. We're offering a free discovery session to kickstart your journey to financial freedom. Yep, you heard me right. Free. In this session, one of our experienced coaches will help you to pinpoint your financial goals and create a better plan for your money. We're talking about mastering your money mindset, picking up practical money management skills, and having someone to hold you accountable along the way. So, if you're ready to kiss financial stress goodbye and say hello to a brighter financial future, then schedule your free session today to create the new money habits you need to achieve financial freedom.
Right. A couple other things I want to make sure I touch on. One is that the whole cultural thing. I will transparently share with you that my husband is Hispanic, and he and I, thank God, we still have another year before we have to come up with an actual plan for this, because he and I are very different in how we want to approach this. In his mind, which is the very so obviously male Hispanic mind, he's like, I'm not going to charge my kid rent to live under my house. Like, that's part of my role as dad. And so I am always like, look, I get it. I understand that. But I also think part of our role as parent is to train them up. And the only way that we can train them up is to empower them to understand these things. And so we still have to have conversation around that. Like I said, I'm glad we have another year to figure it out, because it is a cultural thing, I think. And so I'm glad that we need to have those discussions. Having said that, I think the other thing I want to make sure I bring up is that's part of the whole reason you mentioned, not letting them go until they're ready to get married. I just want to remind you, and I know you know this in the back of your mind, but sometimes our vocation is to the single life. And so we have to make sure that we are also prepared to let our children go if and when it's their time to do that, even if they're not married. But also train them in the way to do that, because if that means that they go out, I mean, you're not going to want them living with you when they're 50 years old, and maybe you are. That's actually a cultural thing too. I actually grew up with my parents obviously lived away from this, but my grandmother and grandfather took in my great grandmother very early on because she was a widow, and they lived together for as long as I ever can remember. Sometimes it wasn't the best scenario, the situation. It ruined their relationship sometimes together. But I think it also is very cultural, and it's something that even just a generation and a half ago, it was very common to do that. So all of that is not to say that there's a right way or a wrong way. It's to say that all of this is nuanced. And because of that, because you're dealing with different generations, you're dealing with different cultures, you're dealing with different socioeconomic abilities, you're dealing with different values, you're dealing with different vocations. All of those things are beautiful. It's beautiful to have all of that difference. And so it has to be considered when making some of these decisions. And that's why when I said at the top of this, I don't feel comfortable saying this is the right time, because we have to be able to consider all of those different factors.
Yeah. I will tell you that I have sat down with my wife recently to talk about the possibility of a three generation household. And I'm probably naively excited about it, right? Like, oh, that would be awesome. Let's do that. And let's continue it, right? Like, let's put ourselves in a position now where if we bring a set of grandparents or a grandmother and do that there would be this natural transition of things, like after they pass and once our children are older, that we would move into that role of as grandparents, they would become the
Mhm.
primary, like, and let's
Mhm.
just keep this thing going, because it is by these methods that families find generational wealth, right?
Mhm.
And I don't want to do it for just that purpose. Like, that'll be a nice little byproduct of what happens. But I'm also of an Italian background, and we we talk about how important family is all the time. Whether or not we actually feel that way, sometimes I'm all like, is this just like a hat that we wear, like a mask? Like, we talk family all the time, but then what are we doing to make it happen? And so I think about it, and I'm like, that sounds amazing. The execution of it might blow up in my face. And
Or it might be the start of something new, well, something recreated, because it's not new. I mean, it's
yeah,
biblical.
right.
That's what they've been doing it for generations. What we're trying now seems to be new,
Yep.
and quite frankly, it's just not cutting it. Like we're seeing I think we're starting to see a lot of the lack of fruit from some of the shift that we've made away from some of that generational stuff. I mean, I'm one to speak, because like I literally picked up my husband and I, but we picked up our families and we moved away from our families.
Mm.
And so we had to figure out how to do it on our own without family. And I know that like my parents were like, that's kind of part of your decision. You did this
Mm.
without family. And there are some things that actually made us stronger as a nuclear family, because we didn't have that that I don't know, cushion to fall on. We didn't have that safety net. We couldn't just call my dad and be like, "Hey, we don't know how to fix the refrigerator. Would you come over and help us?" We had to figure some of that stuff out. And so I
Yeah.
really actually believe very strongly that being able to separate from your parents, join together, there's a reason that that's written in there. so that's that we really need to do that. I think sometimes we just take it to the extreme of that means miles and miles and miles away. It doesn't have to mean that, but you have to be able to have a boundary enough to say, you know what, this is my nuclear family now. This is my priority, and I'm not able to cross that boundary with you. And that doesn't mean that the generational connections aren't just as important, and actually give more, not just generational wealth, but generational fruit to our
Yes.
families. Like
Think,
my children are not nearly as close to my parents as I was to my grandparents, because
yep.
we lived so much closer in proximity.
Yep. There's a brother in my Tuesday night men's group who keeps reminding me, like, if we read Proverbs and it talks about wealth, he's all like, hey, remember, it's not always financial,
Yeah,
right?
that's
Like,
right.
a wealth of, that true, like, family ties and bonds and
Mm-hmm.
and and closeness.
Well, wisdom comes from that,
Yeah.
like that's where we get a lot of that wisdom. And I think sometimes we're more open to learning from people who we feel truly connected to. And so since they're not connected, then a lot of the wisdom is just like a gong. It feels like it's a gong. It's not because it's
Yes.
done without love. It's just because there's not that connection. So you're like, oh yeah, we're driving slow because they're old, and they're yammering about whatever. You have a lot more grace with that kind of stuff when you have that deeper connection. So I can't go back and change any of that. All we can do is what we know better now. But now that we know a little bit better, we can certainly encourage that with our own children, and hope that they hear us.
Yeah. All right. So I think the way to sum this one up is there are no hard and fast rules about when your children are ready.
That's right.
But as we see the culture going in a certain way, maybe it's time to stop, turn, and return to things that just make a little bit more sense, common sense, and dollars and cents, and really train our children up in the way that they shall go, so they'll never depart from it, by making sure that they are ready. And like you said, there's a confluence of things that determine whether they're ready. It's cultural, it's financial, it's their own maturity at times, those types of things. And so really focusing in on how to best prepare and continue to focus on family first. That's easier said than done in certain circumstances, right? Sometimes kids have to get out of their house for whatever reason. But if that's not the case, focus on just training them up in the way that they shall go so that you never depart from it.
Yeah. If I may just add one more thing, it's just the cherry on top is have conversations with your kids. I mean, that's really what this is about. I mean, I think so many times especially in the financial coaching world, everyone's like, well, I didn't learn any financial stuff when I grew up. And so now I want to go and pass that along to the next generation. And so we teach them how to, look at their bank statements, and we teach them things about how numbers work and compound interest and all that stuff. But if we do all of that without taking a chance to listen to them and find out what's actually important to them, then it's all just going to be like Charlie Brown teacher in the ear and out the other. So if you're stuck, if you're a listener right now and you're like, I've got kids, some of them are only 10, some of them are 18. I don't know what I'm going to be doing. I encourage you, don't get wrapped up in how to teach them all the number stuff yet. That's going to come. You do need to do that. They have to create habits, but just have some conversations with them. Figure out what's important to them so that you can know how to help them in a way that will be well received.
Awesome. Well, thank you, as always, for joining us and having such a fruitful conversation.
My pleasure.
That does it for this episode of the New Money Habits Podcast. Remember, if you have any questions, make sure to hit us up on social at New Money Habits and follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Please consider leaving a 5-star rating and review to help us spread this message of hope to people looking for a better plan for their money.